reconstruction and recovery plan, and he wasn't there to make promises but to report on progress of that recovery plan and priority actions that we need to take to restore growth and create jobs. So it was a different, first of its kind State of the Nation address because it's happening during a global pandemic that has worsened our unemployment crisis, poverty, our weak health system, and exposed corruption. So did the president strike the right chords? He delivered a message of hope, compassion, appreciation, solidarity. But what are the key takeouts of his address? What were the missed opportunities? And more importantly, did he inspire you and demonstrate that his government has a plan to lead us during this unprecedented time? Well, to answer these questions and more, I've got my colleagues joining me, EWN parliamentary correspondent Gaye Davis, CapeTalk midday report host Lester Kiewit, and 702 breakfast host Bongani Bingwa. And of course, we would like you to join the conversation. You can give us your reflections on the State of the Nation address. The number to dial is 011-883-0702. In Cape Town, 021-446-0567. You can send us voice notes as well on 072-702-1702. All right, let's get into it. Gaye, Lester, Bongani, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing, Clem?
Yeah, it's great to be on. It's great to be on the Clement Manyathela show again.
Lovely to have you guys here. So let's start with what we normally see, Lester and Gaye, because you guys are in Cape Town. It's so weird. I was saying yesterday that yesterday was actually the first time in 8 years that I was not in Cape Town with you guys covering the State of the Nation address. Everything was so different. In the precinct, there was no red carpet. There was the lighting of the remembrance candles. It was somber. How different was it in the precinct this year compared to the other years, Gaye?
Completely different. From what one's experience of State of the Nation always, many people milling around, the red carpet, the glitz, the glamour, the MPs showing off their outfits or their partners or both, and military processions and parades and the fly past and 21 gun salute. So all of the pomp and the ceremony really attached to a state showing itself, none of that. Instead, a president accompanied by the presiding officers, lighting candles, a poet speaking, and then straight off into the speech. At one moment, I thought it was all going to start terribly early and that everybody's time would be out of whack.
And what about you, Lester?
Clement, for Cape Townians, SONA is almost passé. For many Cape Townians, SONA is almost a nuisance in how it disrupts the city on that day. But from a symbolic showing of state, remember, it's one of the few occasions where the legislature, the judiciary, the executive is all at the same place at the same time. It is a state showing itself the symbolism of democracy. And I miss that. It's probably the first time, as you said, almost close to a decade that I have not been in the parliamentary precinct on SONA Day. So I think while many people turn their noses up to the pomp and ceremony, cost is definitely an issue. We don't necessarily need all those guards of honors, the post and pre-parties. That's probably something we can do away with. But I think the symbolism of a democracy, of different organs of state gathering at the same time, at the same place, that didn't happen. And I think it was very symbolic in this time as well, where we light candles in remembrance of the coming up to 50,000 people that we've lost to COVID-19. Not only the lives that have been lost, but also the livelihoods that have been damaged. So I think that sets the tone for, I think, a very earnest, a very austere occasion, and also a very earnest address by the president.
Bongani, I suppose what also set the tone was the analogy around the fynbos, right? And when the president stood there, I think everybody noticed how exhausted he looked. and probably a clear demonstration of the times, right? It shows what we are dealing with today and how difficult a position that he's in as leader of government.
Yeah, I mean, he's a billionaire. He might reconsider his career options because he certainly doesn't need all the pressure he's currently under. I think it was telling for a number of reasons. As you say, he looked. You could even say overwhelmed in a sense. He looked tired. We've seen him like this, of course, for months now, and some will argue that probably wasn't even the worst we have seen him. There were those telltale signs, the marks on his face from the mask he'd clearly been wearing a little earlier on. It's understood by those who are in the know that even that metaphor of the fynbos was something they decided on very late in the day. Apparently there was a scramble to figure out which flower would best explain the situation that we're in. And I don't know if it landed that well. I think if you are in the Cape, if you're somebody from the Cape, if you're familiar with the flora of the Cape, absolutely you'll get it. But I don't know if it necessarily resonated in the way he would have hoped with the rest of the country. And the reason he's also overwhelmed, obviously, isn't just the physical responsibility, but he's got a credibility crisis, does Cyril Ramaphosa. For all that he said about it being a progress report rather than promises, unfortunately, he cannot stay away from the old promises. So even as he's telling us about more power in the grid, more energy, we remember what he said last year. Even though he's telling us about from road to rail, we remember what he said about the railway infrastructure, which finds itself far worse off in many ways than it was a year ago. So he's got a credibility crisis, not only in terms of what he told us last night, but in terms of his team's ability to deliver it.
Yeah, I want us to get into the nuggets of the State of the Nation address, and I would like us to start maybe with vaccines. And I think the general opinion is that we didn't really get much details. What the president told us really is what I heard the health minister announced yesterday morning, is what I heard the health minister announce, was it a couple of days ago when we heard about the new study around the AstraZeneca. We now know about the 80,000 Johnson & Johnson doses that are expected next week. Did you expect more details, Lester? I think we would have loved some more details just to show, and another, I suppose, demonstration that we've got this in control, because the general public has felt we were a little bit late. And there's just been this confusion around the AstraZeneca vaccine. What happens to it going forward? And I felt the president also didn't use that opportunity to say, this is what our scientists are discussing, and this is what is likely to happen to those doses that we purchase that are not that effective when you look at the mild to moderate illness around the new variant of COVID-19.
If you were to listen to the Democratic Alliance and the EFF pre-SONA yesterday, they would have preferred the president just come and address the issue of COVID-19 and the issues of vaccines. It is the issue of our time at the moment, but the State of the Nation is broader than just one issue. The State of the Nation deals with as many aspects as possible. So if it was up to the DA and EFF, this would have totally just been a COVID-19 vaccine response update. But you're very right. The communication has been to and fro, never here nor there. If you can remember when a few weeks ago was the health minister who said that non-medical methods will be our best defense against COVID-19, maintaining social distances, regulations of gatherings, etc. Fast forward in 2 or 3 days later, there's a press conference saying, well, actually, our scientists say that vaccines are the way to get beyond the COVID-19. And then we have issues with AstraZeneca arriving, issues of whether the efficacy is suited to the new variant discovered here in South Africa. So I think it's very difficult for the president himself to come up on a podium without the backing of a panel of experts as well, to talk exactly about efficacy of vaccines, on what it means for frontline workers. All he can essentially do is talk about the logistics, when we're getting it, how much it will cost, and how we're getting it firstly to frontline workers. And I have a feeling that he would leave that up to his health minister. That is what his health minister's mandate is. the South African public would probably have felt a bit more comforted in him saying it, giving a detailed plan. But I think he'll leave it out. He'll leave it up to his health minister.
Yeah, I think. Gaye, what are your thoughts? I think as just a citizen of this country, I would have felt more confident if I'm hearing from the leader of government reassuring me that we've got this under control, we've decided what we're going to do with the doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. This is what the plan is around the procurement, logistics, and the other critical details of the vaccine program, which remain a concern. The infrastructure, is it ready? The provinces, are they up to date? So as opposed to say the provinces are ready to deliver, give us more details and say this is the infrastructure that is already in place. What were your thoughts on that, Gaye?
I think you make a good point, Clement. But at the same time, I think that do we want the president to stand up there and tell us nonsense? Do we want him to stand up there and make out that there is a detailed logistic plan in place when there is none? Do we want him to stand up and talk about certainty about the efficacy of this or that vaccine when he's not certain himself? And indeed, he's not certain because the scientists, excuse me, aren't certain. So I think that there's a limit, and I think Lester's point is good as well, is that the State of the Nation address, it's the head of state basically coming to reflect on the past year and to spell out the government's goals for the next year. Clearly, the COVID pandemic has brought us into a situation of crisis, and that was obviously something that he had to address. Would it have been sensible for him to use the entire speech to the ins and outs of a very complex logistical program? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that it would have held people. Yes, I understand that people do need reassurance. I think that he went about as far as he could on that. I think that our response to COVID, as we know, the virus has changed and is likely to change again. We've had a second wave and we're likely to see a third wave. It's a very unpredictable situation for the government to be in, and I think that he was probably erring on the side of caution not to thrust pegs deep into the ground with emphasis when, 2 weeks down the line, the situation could quite easily have changed.
Yeah, and things change very quick, eh?
Look, they do, and this is part of the thing that we need to deal with. It seems to me that part of our thinking is to vaccinate our way out of this problem. And while, of course, that is something to consider, part of what we must also think about is the mutations of this virus and how it's a fast-moving target. And it seems to me we've taken our eye off the ball of some of the original interventions, like contact tracing, like isolating. These mutations occur when there's a storm in terms of local transmissions. So we have no idea that a third or fourth wave might not bring yet other mutations. And I get Gaye's point in terms of the detail. We don't want him to be dishonest, but we also want some kind of reassurance. In terms of the vaccines, the names that he mentioned yesterday, Johnson & Johnson, right? We're going to get 9 million, he says, we have secured. But for me, the interesting one was the 20 million Pfizer doses that he mentioned. Now, I had on 702 Breakfast recently the CEO of BioVac, Dr. Morena Makwana, and we had a conversation around particularly the Pfizer vaccine, which of course must be stored at particular temperatures. I think the idea that when those doses arrive, if we find we don't have the fridges, if we find that some provinces won't be able to have the capacity to roll those out, and we've got a very narrow window in which they must arrive and be in people's arms, it's those kinds of things that make people feel, what's the next mistake? What's the next moment where we're going to have egg on our face?
I want us to talk about the economic recovery, because that was priority number 2 of the 4 priorities that the president announced last night. And it was basically in 3 areas, Lester: infrastructure rollout, the local production, buy local. It's funny, when he was saying that, I was thinking to myself, I remember attending the Jobs Summit in Midrand many years ago. That's what COSATU has been calling on. And part of the recommendations and resolutions of that job summit was buying local. And I would have loved the president to come with details of since we had that job summit with our social partners and we resolved to buy local and really speak more about local production in all spheres, private and public, this is how much we've been able to do. This is the success. And I didn't get that sense. He spoke about additional generation capacity to stabilize the grid. But all in all, he was forced to repeat the promises that were made previously and give us maybe progress, particularly on that economic reconstruction document that he released last year.
I think someone should tell the president no one can afford to buy a suit nowadays. But I think he was very.
Nobody has any need for a suit.
I think what he did was he spoke about the green shoots and the positives coming out of particularly the manufacturing and agricultural sector. Yes, we laughed at when he announced that 1 million extra chickens are being produced every year, but it's important to that agricultural lobby. It's important to our local manufacturers and agri-processors, particularly if we look at what's happening in the United States at the moment. In 2025, Africa and the United States will renegotiate AGOA. Over the last few years, South Africa's poultry farmers have suffered under what is essentially being dumping of American chicken in South Africa. So by telling a agri-processing industry, we are going to support you, we are seeing growth in your sector, that by 2025, when we renegotiate AGOA, we are going to support you. I think that is a very, very important lobby. Also, the manufacturing industry. When he announced the manufacturing industry in terms of the automotive sector, that's also very important to create jobs in that particular sector. And I think that is also then trying to branch out in how do you start supporting industry. Also, the infrastructure development program, which early in the week he announced that 600,000 more temporary jobs or job opportunities were created by the plan that he announced in October, that is starting to come into fruition. When he talks about an infrastructure bill trying to support the local construction economy, that pricks up the ears of that particular industry. So it's starting to show signs to various sectors that we are here to support you. Also a plan announced of supporting small and local businesses. So he also, while painting a very gloomy picture, showed the way in where we are starting and could see green shoots. And it's the agricultural, automotive and construction industry where I think we're going to start seeing some growth, hopefully in the next few years.
But then,
and Bongani, he may not have made promises. Yes, Gaye?
So I just wanted to butt in there because, on the other hand, and one of the issues that one has with the speech, but he also reiterated that there would be action against the syndicates that are busy extorting money from construction companies on construction sites where they demand 30% of the contract value, for example, and if they don't get paid, they shut the operation down, essentially. Now, that was something that he talked about in his previous SONA, and I think that it's an indication that that not enough has actually been done to deal with that scourge, and so he's had to repeat it as another thing that is going to happen. With special task teams and proper police on it. So I think that the Department of Trade and Industry got quite a big showing in the speech, because that it's generally all the departments who submit information, hard information, where they're at, what progress they've made to the presidency in order for the speech to be constructed. But I just want to get back to the speech itself, just the very beginning of his decision to only target 4 priorities for government overall, combating the COVID pandemic, fighting corruption, building state capacity, recovering the economy. And I think that was very good on the part of the president and the speech writers, because I think that it manages to concentrate the minds on what the major key tasks are and that what should follow from that.
Yeah, and Bongani, we were speaking yesterday when I was doing a throw forward to my show that, my goodness, we don't want more promises, just be real with us. And it seems this is what he was able to do. He was also dreaming, I should say, last night, because when he was talking about this massive infrastructure rollout, he mentioned the smart cities, and I saw people on Twitter saying, "Oh my God, here we go again." But he gave us an update that the Lanseria smart city, first to be built in a democratic South Africa, is a reality.
No, but we're still at the drawing plan. We're still at the drawing plan
comment
phase, and that's reality. I mean, how much and even though he couched it cleverly around four main themes, unfortunately, he gets back to the unfulfilled promises, no matter which way he tries to dice this thing. I mean, for example, let's talk about the SOEs, the promise to turn them around. How many times have we heard about that? And even if you delve into the details of, say, the poultry industry, with interrupted power supply, we know municipalities often can't guarantee water supply. I know a number of poult producers who've threatened to shut down operations because of where they operate. They're not able to, they don't have certainty of power or even water supply. So those kinds of issues, I mean, Lester mentioned the dumping. It's not only South America. It's not only America. It's also South America and Brazil. All of these things are themes he has touched on before, little bits and pieces he has touched on before. And I think it's just, there was no single moment. I mean, when he started off with Tumamina, we could hang that first one, right, on the idea of Tumamina. I don't walk away from this one with a moment that I can say, all right, look, it's a fast-moving target, COVID-19. We've got crises that have been with us for quite some time. It may take a few more years to resolve some of the problems, but we're on the right track. But I don't have that one moment, that one big idea that I can say, that's what it was about.
Could he have spoken more on...
Bongani is very right. There was not a golden thread, a silver thread that brought all these aspects together. Yes, he started with fynbos. We know that now the president prefers fynbos. Tito Mboweni prefers aloe, and somewhere in Kandla, some people are preferring rooibos. But I digress.
At least no one prefers the Proteas, at least, right?
But look, I just want to touch back on messaging and that golden thread. 11th of February is an important date in South Africa's history. Yesterday, 31 years after Nelson Mandela is released. Yesterday was 55 years after District 6 is declared a whites-only area, along with other areas around the country. More specific to his party, it's the 150th, yesterday, the 11th of February was the 150th anniversary of John Dube. I don't see that silver thread that weaved a speech that is also meant to inspire. Yes, the policy is important. It's the bread and butter. But how do we put action? How do we put inspiration behind that policy? And I was reminded yesterday of how in his first State of the Nation, Nelson Mandela quoted Ingrid Jonker, Afrikaans poet, and a poem that he then quoted in his speech, The Child Is Not Dead. Die kind is nie dood nie. It's based on a child confronting or being killed in protest in Nyanga. Just this week, we had 4 young boys in Nyanga in Cape Town dying after a sand embankment that they were playing on, suffocating in that. Is that not a state of our nation? And again, someone also said on Twitter that we live in a sorry state where people become famous for dying because the state is not acting. And I think of Michael Kompapi, who died in a pit latrine. And I'm going to extend that metaphor to saying that these 4 young boys in Cape Town passed away because not necessarily infrastructure not working, but that sandbank people having to take from that sandbank to fortify homes in informal dwellings.
Yeah.
And that is a state of our nation where the state is not supporting those who need it the most. And I think the golden thread would have been for Cyril Ramaphosa to note that. Take it back to Ingrid Jonker talking about the child in Nyanga, bringing it back to 2021 where 4 young boys died in Nyanga as well. And I think that little silver thread between each of the elements of how the state should function, for me, that wasn't there.
And that's probably one thing that was missing this year. When you look at the previous State of the Nation addresses, when there's a significant moment that happens in the country, the presidents would make sure that they somehow weave that into their speech.
It's leadership, if I may come in there, Clement. I mean, for example, he's talking to us about advisory councils to tackle corruption when he could beef up the existing institutions, be it the NPA, be it the Hawks, be even the Public Protector's Office, for example, in terms of budget support and the like. But also, my sense is that he's obviously been considering a lot of the ANC's internal issues in how he plays this out. And I think the time is running out. At some point, he's got to be the guy who draws a line in the sand, who says, this is how it's going to be, and almost stare his comrades down, those who don't want to support him. I haven't seen that decisive moment, that decisive break with the recent past, other than perhaps piecemeal dishing out of certain initiatives, but nothing centered around his person.
Yeah, look, we're going to get into what he had to say about corruption. I want us to look at the UIF and the 350 unemployment grant. We'll talk about municipalities, investment as well. You're listening to, it's in fact 9:34, and you're listening to the special broadcast. We're live on 702 and CapeTalk. This is SONA in 60 minutes. I'm Clement Manyathela. I'm joined by my colleagues, 702 breakfast host Bongani Bingwa, EWN correspondent in Parliament Gaye Davis, and midday report host and on CapeTalk Lester Kiewit. And we're dissecting what came out of the State of the Nation address last night. If you have thoughts, you can get in touch with us. 011-883-0702, in Cape Town 021-446-0567. You are also welcome to send voice notes on 072-702-1702. Here's what the president said when he spoke about capacitating and improving governance at local government level.
SONA in 60 minutes.
What it means for you.
With Clement Manyathela
on 702 and CapeTalk.
We are proceeding with our efforts to strengthen local government and to strengthen local government infrastructure and accelerate service delivery through the district development model. The model brings all spheres of government to focus on key priorities and implementation of critical high-impact projects. Working with both public and private sector partners, government is implementing a range of measures to support municipalities to address inadequate and inconsistent service delivery in areas such as water provision, infrastructure build, maintenance. We are also focusing on the appointment of properly qualified officials at local level to ensure effective management and provision of services. In some municipalities, we have often found that less than well-qualified people have been appointed, and all they ever do is to mess up. Now we are saying the days of messing up are now over. We want professional people to run our local government.
So, Gaye, one of the things that honestly frustrated me was the clapping from ANC members of parliament. It really did, because even before the president could get into the details of what he's saying, they would be clapping. Even here, Gaye, you have heard how many times you've sat in those parliamentary committees with the AG coming to tell members of parliament how bad the situation is at local government. Like how we have officials there that are not properly qualified, and that often leads to those municipalities being run to the ground. So this is not nothing new, and I thought I was going to hear this is the timeline. By the end of this year, we are going to have a review of the municipality, and we will know who is qualified, who is not, and we'll give feedback. What did you make of what he had to say about municipalities in comparison to what the AG has always been saying over the years?
Yeah, I mean, a wry smile across my face when he said, some municipalities, we've got this problem, with unqualified people, and then they just make a mess. He should have said most municipalities. I think 90% of them.
Yeah. 90%, yeah.
they're busy drawing up budgets that they haven't got the funds for. They're essentially insolvent. The roads are falling apart. The people are not getting water coming out of taps. The situation is absolutely dire, and we've got a local government election still on the cards for this year. Now, that was obviously throwing a bone perhaps to people sitting in municipalities like this who are absolutely desperate for proper services to be delivered and have no realistically of getting them, apart from the chance of maybe voting their council out in the coming elections and getting new people. Also, it's not the first time that we've heard about the need for qualified municipal officials. I remember initiatives years ago, saying that municipal managers needed to have particular qualifications. It just never really came down to it. And you ended up seeing municipalities spending huge quantities of money on consultants who charged enormous fees to write a simple letter on behalf of the municipality to some or other authority. The other thing about this is that, and it goes to what Bongani was saying earlier about the president and his credibility. There's only so much credibility that you have and your political capital. And I think that the president has to be terribly careful that he doesn't squander it all, because he's at a particular juncture now in his term. It's sort of midterm. There's the ANC's National General Council coming up. He's going to face an elective conference very soon, actually. It's really not a long way away. In December, so, and then he's obviously going to be wanting a second term. I think that there are many other people who would want him to have a second term. But well,
that's part of the thing I was saying earlier. Okay? I've got to come in that brave. This is why I think he needs to be
and just go back to the cat. But
that's why he needs to be decisive.
Let me just finish that. I just want to finish the point about the municipal thing, and that is that it's easy for him to stand there and to say, we're not going to have people messing up at municipal level anymore. We want professional people at municipal level. But the bottom line is that these are invariably ANC members or supporters who are in jobs that are paying way over the medium mark for the areas that they're in, and they're going to be incredibly unhappy about being asked to step aside or to resign or to move on, because they have nowhere else to move on to.
That is so interesting. The finance minister, Bongani, before you come in, the finance minister was actually raising this concern a couple of months ago of some municipal managers who actually earn more than the DG of Treasury at national level. And that will frustrate some of these cadre deployment people at local government who now would have to have their salaries revised, or they have to be pushed out of the way. Politically, that may be a consideration that may impact on the president's political clout.
And I think the forces are gathering against him. I think what Gaye was saying.
Are there. That's what
that's what I think you were saying, Gaye, around not squandering your capital, your political capital, because it's not as if, as he makes these pronouncements, the people who are most likely going to be affected by the consequences that flow from them are sitting idly by, watching by. I think we can go back even to even the tea, what was it, tea party? I don't know what you would call it, with opposition forces, notwithstanding what's emerging out of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. Gaye, I'd be keen to know your reflections on watching Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo sitting in Parliament yesterday, having heard everything he's been told, just even in this last week, for example, about Parliament's inability to keep the executive in check. There were a couple of moments where the cameras revealed almost a poker face, if you will, of the Deputy Chief Justice, but it just seemed it was an interesting image for me to observe.
And I think that's why it's important to have events like this, where you have all three arms of government together under one roof, where they're face to face, really. And I think I'm not going to presume, Bongani, to even begin to think what was inside Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo's head. his brain is far too big. I would get lost. I would wander around. I wouldn't be able to find my way out again. But I think that the evidence that he's heard in recent weeks, particularly with regard to parliamentary oversight and Parliament's failure to do a proper job of keeping the executive to account, I think has been an eye-opener for him, essentially. He's learned a lot about the way Parliament operates, more particularly how the ANC is operated in Parliament. But I think that we also need to remember that it's our electoral system that goes for the proportionate representation with the closed party list that actually leads to MPs being put to Parliament by their parties, directly by voters. So I think that when you've got somebody in Parliament because their party put them there, as one of the MPs who gave some evidence during this recent time at Zondo was, that you party tells you, because it's career limiting if you don't, and you because you don't have the skills to shift easily into another job and move on and set up your own company or go and be a CEO of some other company, you tend to avoid career limiting options, and you don't because you want to cling on to your job and to your salary, which is not inconsiderable.
And that's it, Lester, that's quite a tricky one. Yes, it's career limiting, but it's country destroying when you've got a chair of a parliamentary committee who are supposed to investigate the Gupta's contracts with one of our state agencies, and she's simply chosen not to do so, not because there wasn't evidence or that parliamentary inquiry wasn't going to help with the evidence needed by law enforcement agencies or us understanding the extent of the theft, but because she is beholden to the party that has elected her in Parliament. And Jesse Duarte, the Deputy Secretary General, wrote an opinion piece in the Daily Maverick trying to teach us about democratic centralism. But that's it's us, the citizens, it's us, the nation, that suffers because of that principle.
I just want to wrap up the thought on municipalities. Getting a competent chartered accountant to be a CFO of a rural municipality at a market-related salary is going to be much more harder than we are talking about here. If you're going to try and attract someone who is qualified as a CEO to Gasegonyani municipality in Kuruman or Karoo Hoogland in Williston in the Northern Cape, and not being disparaging to the Northern Cape, you're going to have to develop that entire municipality, that entire town. You're going to have to develop an area where a professional wants to move to have a professional life. And at the moment, I know of very few chartered accountants who would want to move to a rural municipality in South Africa at a market-related price. They want to go there if they are going to be paid for their expertise and for living in Kuruman. Nothing wrong with Kuruman. I love the town. It's absolutely beautiful. But it's different from Cape Town, eThekwini, and Johannesburg. On the issue of MPs and the ability to hold the executive to account, I think as we develop the new electoral bill, I think many people are going to start being worried that, particularly political parties, if the electorate is going to, from the tone that we're getting, that MPs are accountable to their parties and not to the electorate, I think that many political parties should be worried. And that what we're seeing with recent by-elections, many voters moving away from larger political parties, going to more fringe parties, maybe even civic organizations. So by 2024, when we have provincial and national elections, and there is the ability for independent candidates to stand in those elections, I think it's going to be very, very interesting of how formalized political parties like the ANC, that adopts the principle of democratic centralism within the party, versus people saying we no longer want political party representation. I want the person who stands up for me in my constituency, in my community. Maybe that is the way of having a more accountable legislature.
Yeah, and because they take their oath of office to the Constitution and not to the political party that elected them in Parliament. I want to quickly take some calls on 011-883-0702 in Cape Town, 021-446-0567. There are also voice notes that are coming on 0727021702. In fact, let's start with the voice note.
Morning, Clement and Bongani, Bingwa and other guests in studio. Will South Africa ever have a president who will present a SONA that will speak to the residents of Manyathela, Ramatlabama in Northwest, that will speak to the residents of Kanyamazane, Bushbuckridge in Mpumalanga, including other neglected communities in rural parts of this country, where even today, many still have no drinking water, some belief talk.
You know, when he was talking about the fine boss, Bongani, I was like, who is this guy talking to? Like, Are you talking to my mother in Mpumalanga, John, who is in the Eastern Cape in Kwanyama? Like, who are you talking to?
Look, I mean, and that's a difficult one, right? Because whilst, of course, he may not have been speaking to those people using that imagery, there are people in this country with whom that might have resonated. But if we go back to this idea, as Lester said, of a golden thread, you need something that everybody is going to instantly understand. You need something that people are going to instantly connect with, as something they have seen, as something that they've observed, as something that reflects a little bit of their reality. I think criticism from some of the opposition parties that the speech may be a tad out of touch is going to be difficult in some points to defend.
Yeah, let's go to Midrand. Kustas, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Clement, and to your panel. This is such a wonderful conversation, but here's the question I want to ask to your panel. Can we really take this president as he's serious about fighting corruption? Let me explain why. Yesterday, I picked up a contradiction. His government last year reduced the budget of NPA, SARS, and police. And that money was taken to fund that vanity project SAA that we don't want. Yesterday, he says, well, I'm forming a new council for corruption, what. And he says also we are serious about mafias or syndicates that are in the construction sector. Hang on, this council doesn't have the biting power that SARS has, or the police has, or even the NPA has. Can we really take him serious when he reduces the budget on the real crime busters, and then a one-liner to say, I'm serious about it? But the contradiction is that you've just taken money out of them.
Yeah.
And then you're forming another council that will take 25 years to work. That's my question.
Kustas, thank you. Lester, I mean, that's a fair point, right? The NPA was in Parliament last year saying we lack capacity, we need more money. So shouldn't the focus then be on just capacitating these law enforcement institutions as opposed to appoint this advisory council that must establish this independent corruption fighting body, and then that will lack capacity as well because you haven't capacitated the existing ones?
People don't want to see an anti-corruption council. People want to see legal counsel in a court prosecuting crimes of corruption perpetrated against the state and the South African people and people who live in this country. And I think that is the nub of Costa's point, that people want to see action. But look, we know the wheels of justice grind at snail's pace. I spoke to Mkuleko Hlengwa yesterday, chairperson of Scopa. And he's saying things have been happening, particularly over this period of COVID corruption. SIU, Competition Commission, various other investigating bodies have been doing their work. Just last week, Advocate Andy Mutibi delivered his latest report on SIU investigations. Appointments are being made in certain parts to bolster the prosecuting authority. Yes, they may still be lacking within police crime fighting bodies, particularly in a body that particularly looks into corruption. A reboot of the Scorpions that was announced last year. When's that going to happen? But beyond that, I think many people, and I speak this from my circles, my family who I talk to, people not only people understand that procedure runs slowly, but people wants to start seeing action now. People wants to start seeing the attitude, the philosophy, the moral bereftness of not only politicians, businesses, but also of us as South Africans being addressed. And I don't think the president talks enough about how does he, how does we, how does all of us in South Africa, from politically connected people to business people, how do we contribute to the general atmosphere of corruption in South Africa? That doesn't come through for me.
Larry, you calling us from Lenasia. Good morning.
Yeah, Clement, thanks, man. I had the opportunity of listening to all the people on your panel, and I guess look, one is to but respect their views, but I don't necessarily believe that one must agree with all their views. But let's go to the main ethos of the president's speech. Firstly, I think he was very constructive in basically choosing only 4 priorities. Right? He could have chosen much more. Right, and I think for me, he did justice in each one of them, starting off with the vaccine and what you call it, economic growth and corruption. So yes, that there could be some blur areas here and there. But as the public, Clarence, as a public, what is it that I want? I want hope. And believe me, I got hope. I got hope last night. Had he went anything further, he would have dropped that hope again. And I think our panel must understand, sometimes we make things too academic unnecessarily. Okay? We need to come to party and be on the ground when you start looking at things. Many people have lost jobs. Lives have been gone. What is it that he can do? The corruption thing is going to be there. It's not unique to South Africa. The corruption thing is a thing throughout the world.
Yeah, Larry, I think you make a fair point there, Gaye, it's easy for us to sit here, right, and critique the president as the leader of government. He's the man that has to take these tough decisions. And for Larry, he says, I wanted hope, and I got hope.
Yeah, I think that Larry makes a really, really, really important point. And that is that in as much as the State of the Nation address is a recounting of what the government's done or supposed to have done, didn't do, and what it wants to do. It is essentially the president talking to the people. And while he has not, in the view of many, sort of communicated adequately with people in Dolphinville, maybe, or in far-flung areas of the Northern Cape, as Lester was referring to, it is essentially a PR exercise. And I think that as they go, if he was able to give people a feeling of just a glimmer of hope to make it worth carrying on, the kind of situation that we're in, given the job losses, given the economic crisis that we're in, I think that that's important. And I think that that's an important function for a head of state to be able to do that.
Yeah, as we wrap up, Bongs, you'll jump in here. I wanted to ask you what you think was his missed opportunity. What opportunity did he miss? Because as I was listening to him, I felt we have a former president who is quite literally spitting on the Constitution. And I felt when he was talking about state capture, he could have emphasized more the need to respect the rule of law. I felt he could have, even though he doesn't make reference to the former president, but speak about the importance of respecting the Constitution and the apex court. And I personally thought that was a missed opportunity. He was addressing the nation. People are looking at these developments and are wondering, we want you as the president, whose responsibility is actually to defend and protect the Constitution. Lead us.
Look, I mean, it goes beyond that, right? If you go back to the original Constitutional Court judgment around Nkandla and the person of the president being a constitutional being in terms of not just protecting the Constitution, but fighting for the Constitution, right? You keep asking this thing of, did we get hope out of it? I don't know if we got hope, but perhaps you could say that we got a little bit of hype as well. And that's what we've got to be careful of, right? That it's not hype, but it is hope. What's the one thing perhaps he could have done? Perhaps emphasize, I think, the state's role as a catalyst for change, as a driver of change, rather than the sense of ownership, of being entirely responsible for change. So, for example, one of the things that I thought thought was really positive was when he started talking about the private sector being a major player when it comes to job opportunities and job creation. I thought that was something that was important, because quite often we're so obsessed with external solutions. We talk about the commitments around foreign direct investment when local investment is sitting on piles of cash now, but they won't be fooled by the slogans. They won't be fooled by appeals to things that are not based on the reality and the ease of doing business. Conducive. Right? Yeah. So he says it's easier to do business in South Africa, but the question remains, is it easy? Maybe easier doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah. And what about you, Lester?
I'm going to leave my final thoughts on what I appreciated as a son of teachers, as a brother of a nurse, as a relative of shop assistants and police officers. The president was quite on point to thank those who've been on the front line over the last 12 months. He spoke about this moment or this period of solidarity where South Africans have stood side by side with each other. That, for me, I appreciated, and I'm sure frontline workers did as well. But now the president has to walk the talk, as with the buck stopping with him. We can have as much solidarity, social solidarity as possible, but he needs to put his money where his mouth is when it comes to now providing vaccines, making sure that there is limit COVID corruption as possible, because out of all that, if that doesn't happen, those thanks to those frontline workers, they are then mute. So I appreciate it as someone, and I'm sure many of you out there are either frontline workers or are related to, know what a difficult time it has been for so many people in this country over the last 12 months.
Gaye Davis, you've got 10 seconds.
I echo Lester's sentiments about the people. I just want to say that the president's got very little time in which to ensure that his plans go ahead. Much will depend on the ministers he has around him, and that's another whole conversation in itself.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Bongani Bingwa, 702 Breakfast host, Lester Kiewit, Midday Report host on CapeTalk, and our EWN parliamentary correspondent, Gaye Davis. And thanks to you for listening to this special broadcast on 702 and on CapeTalk, and we've been live as well on Facebook. This was SONA in 60 minutes. It's 10 o'clock.
702.
More than a radio station.
Let's walk the talk.